We're joined today by Stefan Thoren and Peder Vessel, the founders of Pecunia. Pecunia is in partnership with the National launching a mortgage map. Perhaps you could tell us a bit more about that.
Yep, so thank you first of all for inviting us here today. So the idea is to create a map based on Google Maps where you can see over the UAE, where people can place their mortgages online to create transparency around what are actually rates that people are paying. Because we've noticed that a lot of our friends are coming into the UAE, and if they're looking especially now to buy a house, a property, it's very difficult to find out quickly what is a reasonable rate to be paying.
It's a great idea because, of course, in the UAE, lots of people paying lots of different rates depending on who their banker is, who they bank with, and when they got into the market as well. So presumably this allows consumers to have much greater visibility on what their neighbours are paying.
Absolutely. So that's why the map is there, so you can see and compare it to others. And also the element around like the crowdsourcing to get as many people together to really provide. So it's built on the fact that the community puts in their mortgage, and then through that you can see others. And we're seeing a dramatic uptake over the last few days. So right now I think we have somewhere around 50 data points already since launch of yesterday. And this is something which we're expecting to continue to grow together with the community of the UAE.
And of course this idea isn't new in itself, it's worked well before in Scandinavia, I believe.
That's right. A similar initiative has been launched in Sweden, where one of the major newspapers, Svenska Dagbladet, launched a similar initiative that reached a lot of people. And it also managed to create a discussion in the society around what are fair rates, what are reasonable rates depending on where you live and the kind of size of mortgages you have. And it has helped in raising awareness around mortgages, around mortgage rates. And I think, if our aim is to do something similar here in the UAE, and hopefully to the benefit of the whole UAE society.
Indeed, yeah, and benefiting homeowners in the sense that potentially this creates pressure on banks to offer more affordable deals to customers.
Well, I think our ambition here, firstly, is to create transparency.
Yeah.
And from transparency, naturally comes the things that you discuss. So, of course, if you go into a map and you're looking for a mortgage and you can see that people are paying rates around 4.5%, you're going to be inclined to go with providers that will give you that level.
And so in terms of how a market like the UAE compares to Sweden, are there particular differences? Is there more of a range of mortgages on offer here than in perhaps other more developed markets around the world? Perhaps you could talk about that.
I mean, something we saw, because we did the analysis on Sweden before, since we're both Swedish. So in Sweden there is probably around 4 to 5 products that are bought by like over 90% of the market. So that is kind of the products that people are taking. And then there's always certain kind of one-off deals that are made, but that is very limited for the market at whole. I think in the UAE there's kind of a forming happening in the market. We're seeing right now a broader variety, but still there seems to be some kind of standardization coming into the market. So it's evolving kind of towards people are starting to compare, and when you do, the banks probably give similar offers. Because today we see, for instance, many banks might have, you get a reduced rate in the beginning, but then the rate is much higher. And that becomes much more tricky to kind of compare with others because the banks might not be taking the same time period and so forth. So that is likely to evolve as well over time through the mortgage map, that people can see, okay, what are others comparing and what are they paying? So we are expecting some standardization across.
Okay, so with more people inputting their data onto the mortgage map and more people knowing what their neighbours are paying, what everyone else is paying, you're expecting to see more convergence, if you like, in terms of what the average mortgage rate in the country is likely to be.
We do believe that there is going to be a conversion in terms of mortgage rates. Just to mention some very preliminary findings that we have from the data we have so far, is that the spread in terms of what people are paying in interest rate is fairly big. And that is something that we would expect to narrow a bit once the market becomes more transparent and it's clear to people what other people are paying.
So from the bank's perspective, we all love complaining about the banks. Is this a good thing from their perspective, do you think? Are they going to be happy about your product?
I think for the banks that are offering competitive rates, this is a very appealing thing, because all of a sudden they will be kind of presented to the broader community that, okay, customers in these type of banks are getting a certain level of rates. It's likely the customers are going to start applying for their mortgages with that bank. So we think it's a big opportunity for the banks.
Yeah. We should mention that this is obviously part of the financial literacy campaign that the National is running at the moment. I mean, do you think there's a lot to be done in developing financial literacy in this part of the world among the people here?
I think there's some tendencies in the UAE which are signals that a lot of people are kind of coming into a position where there's a lot of debt right now. So it is being addressed throughout society. I think Abu Dhabi, for instance, is heavily looking into what can be done in order to improve the situation. I think some of the statistics that the National were publishing was mentioning, for instance, that I think it was 1 in 5 families are having a certain amount of mortgages and other financial debt where they're starting to use other credit to actually make the installments on the existing credit. So I think there will be a good discussion to be had around that.
And then to sum up, what really incentivizes people to part with their details? I mean, you're trying to establish a community here. Yeah. Anybody can go onto the mortgage map, see what everybody else is paying. What really incentivizes them to put their own details in?
So I would think, beyond being part of an effort to increase the transparency in the market, which I think is important in itself, I think it's worth mentioning that it's very easy. Our users have been able to go through the process of putting up their mortgages in 2 or 3 minutes. It's safe. We keep your personal details safely stored, and the things that are shared in the map are things that are not in any way connected to you.
Well, hopefully people will get on board and it will be a great success. Thank you both for coming in.
Thank you.